It was a dark and cold night, the kind that seemed to swallow any trace of light. I was driving along Interstate 80, crossing the vast, desolate stretches of Nevada. My truck roared down the road as the sky pressed down on the world around me, heavy with distant stars and infinite darkness. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and my only companions were the white lines of the road and the monotone voice of the radio, narrating a playlist of somber country songs. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the hum of tires against the asphalt. A chill ran down my spine as the fuel gauge warned me I'd need to refuel soon. From what I remembered of the map, the next gas station was over 50 miles away. I decided to slow down and sharpen my focus. This wasn't the time to take risks. And then I saw it. A solitary figure stood by the side of the road, illuminated by the beams of my headlights. It was something I hadn't expected, especially in this remote, desolate region. The person seemed dressed in loose, faded clothing, but it was hard to make out details at first. They waved slowly and methodically, as if they had all the time in the world. My heart raced. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour of the night? I thought. Part of me wanted to stop and offer help. The other, more instinctive part told me to keep going and not look back. I'd heard stories of robberies and traps set up by fake hitchhikers on deserted roads, but there was something different about this person. As I drove past, I glanced at them in my rearview mirror. The figure stood motionless, but something about it deeply unsettled me. They didn't look like someone asking for help. They looked like someone watching. I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like a shadow. 15 minutes later, I heard an unexpected sound, a metallic thud coming from the back of the truck. Something had either hit or fallen in the trailer. I slowed down, my heart pounding in time with the engine. It's probably just one of the boxes coming loose, I thought, trying to reassure myself. But when I glanced at the mirror again, I thought I saw something moving far off on the road. Stopping in the middle of the night, in a place this desolate, wasn't something I did often. But the persistent noise left me no choice. I pulled over to the shoulder, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out of the truck. The night felt even quieter now, as if the darkness itself was holding its breath. I walked to the back of the truck, shining the flashlight over the trailer. Everything appeared normal, no fallen boxes, no visible issues. But then I noticed something that froze me in my tracks. Handprints smeared in the dust on the side of the trailer. They were fresh. The flashlight trembled in my grip as I scanned the area around me. There was no one in sight, just the faint sound of wind sweeping through the mountains. I hurried back to the cab and locked the doors, ignoring the growing feeling that someone or something was watching me. When I turned the engine back on, I glanced one last time in the rearview mirror. The road was empty, but the chill running down my spine remained. Something was wrong. I knew this wasn't over. I pressed the accelerator, eager to leave that figure in the desert behind me. Little did I know that night was far from over. I kept the truck at high speed, trying not to glance at the rearview mirror. The figure by the roadside and the handprints on the trailer kept hammering in my mind, like a haunting echo. It felt as if an invisible shadow was sitting next to me, silently watching. After a few tense minutes, I finally saw the lights of a gas station, a beacon in the midst of the infinite darkness. I pulled the truck over and got out to refuel, my senses heightened in the eerie stillness around me. The place was almost deserted save for a drowsy attendant inside the convenience store. As the fuel pump hummed and filled the tank, I noticed something strange. In the glass reflection of the store window, it looked like someone was standing near the truck. I spun around immediately, but there was no one there. "Calm down, it's just your mind playing tricks," I murmured to myself, trying to quell the rising panic. But the unease lingered. I capped the tank, paid quickly, and decided to check the trailer one last time before continuing the journey. That's when I found something that shouldn't have been there. At the back of the trailer, nestled among the boxes, was an old leather suitcase I had never seen before. It wasn't listed in the cargo inventory, and it certainly wasn't something I'd placed there. Climbing into the trailer, flashlight in hand, I approached the suitcase cautiously. At first glance, it appeared empty. but there was something deeply unsettling about it. The leather was stained with dark patches resembling rust, but the metallic scent reminded me too much of fresh blood. My pulse quickened. Before I could decide what to do, I heard a faint noise, a whisper, almost imperceptible. It was coming from inside the suitcase, and unmistakably, it was the sound of breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. With trembling hands, I slowly unzipped the suitcase. Inside, there was only one thing, a folded piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it. Scrawled on the page in what looked like red ink were just 3 words, "You've been marked." I stumbled back, my heart racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Then, the lights at the gas station flickered and went out for a brief moment. When they came back on, I saw something that froze me to the core. The figure from the roadside was now standing in the shadows next to the truck, staring straight at me. I bolted to the cab, leaving the suitcase and paper behind. Locking the doors, I floored the accelerator and sped away, desperate to escape. Yet the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. In the rearview mirror, I saw something inexplicable. The shadow of the figure. It wasn't outside. It was inside the cab, in the back seat, even though no one was there. With every mile I drove, the air inside the truck grew heavier, almost suffocating. The radio suddenly filled with static, but amidst the noise I could hear a faint, repetitive murmur. The voice sounded disturbingly familiar, though I couldn't make out the words. Hours later, when I finally saw the lights of a small town on the horizon, the radio cleared up and the oppressive weight inside the cab lifted. I pulled over at the first safe spot I found, stepping out of the truck, gasping for air. Looking back at the road I had just traveled, I thought I was finally free. But then I noticed something in the dust that had gathered on the truck's rear window. A handprint freshly drawn, as if to remind me that this story was far from over. Since that night, I haven't been able to drive on deserted highways without feeling like something or someone is following me. Who was that figure? Why was I marked? I may never know the answers, but one thing is certain, I will never take that road again. It was a typical night in the middle of the Arizona desert, where the isolation of the road felt almost tangible. My name is Frank, and I've been a trucker for over 15 years. I've seen it all on the highways, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. I was hauling a load of fresh fruit to Los Angeles and had decided to push through for a few more hours before taking a rest. The full moon illuminated the asphalt and the dry bushes stretching endlessly along the highway. Everything was calm, except for the constant hum of the engine and the faint crackle of an AM radio, broadcasting old country tunes and muffled news reports. Suddenly, something on the horizon caught my eye. A small silhouette stood directly in the middle of the road. I slowed down, frowning as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. As I got closer, I realized it was a child, a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, dressed in simple clothes resembling a scout uniform with a backpack slung over his shoulders. He stood motionless, facing away from me, like a statue in the deserted road. I honked the horn, the loud sound echoing across the empty expanse. He didn't move. I brought the truck to a complete stop, shifting into neutral, and turned on my hazard lights. Something felt off, very off. I climbed out of the cab, leaving the engine running, and walked toward the boy. As I got closer, I noticed he didn't react to my presence. "Hey, kid, are you all right?" I called out, trying to sound calm and not alarm him. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring intently at the empty horizon ahead. When I finally got within a few feet of him, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. His bare feet were caked with dust, and his hair was disheveled, as if he'd been out in the elements for far too long. "Where are your parents?" I asked again, but he remained frozen. When I was close enough to reach out, he finally turned his head toward me. His eyes were a pale, almost glowing blue, reflecting the moonlight in a way that felt unnatural. His expression was a mixture of sadness and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Before I could say another word, he whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Chills ran down my spine. "What do you mean, kid?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. as adrenaline started to surge through me. He slowly raised his hand and pointed to something behind me. The motion was so sudden that I instinctively turned around, expecting to see another car or someone else. But there was nothing, just the empty road. When I looked back at the boy, he was gone. I spun around, scanning the area in disbelief. There was nowhere he could have gone. It was an open stretch of highway with nothing but desert in every direction. I ran back to the truck, my heart pounding like a drum. Climbing into the cab, I noticed my breathing was rapid, and the radio, which had been playing a soft country tune, was now emitting only static. I threw the truck into gear and sped away, desperate to leave that spot behind. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that nearly made me lose control of the wheel. Standing in the middle of the road where the boy had been was a much taller figure shrouded in shadows, watching me as I drove away. It wasn't until I reached the next gas station nearly 50 miles later that I finally stopped. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation for what had happened. But deep down, I knew there was nothing rational about that night, and the boy's voice still echoed in my head. You shouldn't be here. After what happened that night, I knew I needed to stop and gather my thoughts. At the gas station, the place was eerily empty, save for a sleepy attendant and a few flickering lights overhead. I parked the truck and stepped out, taking deep breaths of the desert's dry air as I tried to shake off the image of the boy and the figure I'd seen in my rearview mirror. I went into the convenience store and bought a strong coffee. My hands were trembling as I handed the money to the clerk, who barely glanced at me. You okay, buddy? He asked casually. I almost told him what had happened, but who would believe a story like that? Instead, I just nodded and muttered something about being tired. Back in the truck, I sat in the driver's seat and took a sip of the coffee, hoping the warmth and caffeine would banish the cold that seemed to linger in my chest. That's when I noticed something odd. A thin layer of dust on the dashboard, and next to it, a mark. It was small, like a handprint, but it didn't look human. The fingers were long, almost unnaturally so, and the outline had an unsettling wrongness about it, something that made my mind recoil from the sight. I decided to keep driving. Staying put only amplified my unease. I adjusted the mirrors, turned on the headlights, and got back on the road, determined to leave that place far behind. The night felt darker than before, as if the stars had disappeared entirely. Only the headlights pierced the asphalt ahead, and the hum of the engine seemed unnaturally loud. I tried to find music on the radio, but all I got was static. About 20 minutes later, something forced me to slam on the brakes. There, in the middle of the road again, was the boy. He looked exactly the same, standing still, staring at me. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the shadowy figure I had glimpsed in my mirror, now clearer and far taller than I had imagined. Its edges were indistinct, as though it was made of smoke or shadows, but its eyes glowed faintly red. The boy raised his hand as if trying to warn me, and then pointed once again to something behind me. A chill ran down my spine, but this time I didn't turn around. Instead, I shifted the truck into reverse, keeping my eyes locked on the figures ahead. They didn't move. They just watched as I slowly backed away. Once I felt I was far enough, I shifted into drive and sped off, swerving onto the shoulder to avoid passing too close to them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the boy open his mouth, but no sound came out. Only silence, as if the world around me had frozen. When I glanced in the rearview mirror again, they were gone. The relief was short-lived because I realized, despite being miles from where it all started, the feeling of being watched still clung to me like a shadow. At dawn, I finally reached my destination and unloaded the cargo. Exhausted but restless, I stopped at a local diner to gather myself. While sipping my coffee, I decided to research the stretch of road where I'd seen the boy and the figure. What I found chilled me to the bone. That section of highway had a dark history. Decades ago, a school bus had been involved in a tragic accident there, killing several children and the driver. Some believed the souls of the children still wandered the area, along with something darker, something that kept them bound to that place. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never take that stretch of road again. There's something out there in the desert, guarding secrets we, as mere travelers, were never meant to uncover. And sometimes, the things you encounter on the road don't just want to be seen, they want to keep you there. The roads in the United States have a way of becoming lonely companions when night falls. As a truck driver, that truth was nothing new to me. I was on my way to Dallas, driving along a desolate stretch of Texas highway. It was the kind of road where the only sign of civilization was the occasional gas station, scattered like oases in a desert of asphalt. My fuel gauge was nearing empty when I spotted a gas station in the distance. It looked old, almost abandoned, but the flickering "Open 24 hours" sign was a beacon I couldn't ignore. It was my only option. I pulled into the lot and parked next to one of the pumps. The silence of the place was absolute, broken only by the hum of my truck as I turned off the engine. As I stepped out, a cold wind swept through, unusual for that region and time of year. The convenience store was lit up, but its windows were grimy and opaque, as if time and dirt had erased their transparency. I walked inside, the bell above the door echoing in the empty space. No one was behind the counter. The store was bathed in dim fluorescent light, casting an eerie glow over the disorganized shelves stocked with expired goods. The floor creaked under my boots with every step. I was about to call out when a woman appeared from the back aisle. She had an unusual presence. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken and shadowed, and her blonde hair was disheveled. Her expression was neutral, but something about her unsettled me. "Need help?" she asked in a low, raspy voice. "Just need to fill the tank," I replied, trying to keep my discomfort in check. She nodded and handed me a key. "The pumps here are manual. You'll have to activate the system outside next to the pump." I thanked her and headed back out, but as I walked to the truck, I felt eyes on me. Turning around, I saw the woman standing at the window, staring at me. Her gaze was fixed, almost as if she were waiting for something. Shaking off the unease, I walked to the pump. I used the key to activate the system and began fueling up. That's when I noticed something strange. In the reflection on my truck's window, I saw not just my truck, but the faint outline of a figure standing behind it. I hadn't heard footsteps. I spun around quickly, but there was no one there. The lot was empty, save for my truck. I looked around, my pulse quickening, but the only movement came from the wind, stirring the nearby trees. I returned to the pump, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But when I finished fueling and turned to return the key, the woman was outside, standing near the store, watching me again. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice tight. She smiled, a smile that offered no comfort. "Be careful on the road," she said before turning and disappearing back inside. I climbed into the truck, a deep sense of unease knotting my stomach. I started the engine and pulled out of the station quickly, but the discomfort lingered. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. The woman was in the window again, but this time, a shadow loomed behind her, much taller, almost as if something were watching her. Speeding down the dark highway, I tried to shake the image from my mind. But as I drove, I noticed something else. In the passenger seat, something was out of place, an object I knew hadn't been there before, an old cassette tape with a handwritten label that read, "For you." My hands trembled as I kept driving, unsure what to do with it. Whatever was happening, I knew it wasn't over yet. I hesitated before touching the cassette tape resting on the passenger seat. The pale light from the truck's dashboard illuminated the label, revealing the jagged handwriting that read, "For you." My hands shook as I picked it up, turning it over between my fingers. It didn't make sense. I knew that tape wasn't there before. I glanced in the rearview mirror, bracing myself for what I might see, or what I feared. But the road behind me was empty. I exhaled deeply, though the unease lingered. Against my better judgment, I inserted the tape into the old cassette player in the truck. What came out was deafening and ominous, a screeching noise, followed by faint whispers that sounded as though they came from somewhere impossibly distant. I turned the volume down, straining to make sense of it. Then a deep, dragging voice spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped at that station." My eyes widened and my heart raced. The voice continued, slow and cruel. Now you're marked. Marked. The word echoed in my mind like a death sentence. I abruptly ejected the cassette and shoved it into the glove compartment, as if that could rid me of the ominous weight it carried. I focused on the road, trying to regain control of my thoughts. But something was wrong. I knew the next town was about 30 miles from the gas station, but the miles stretched on endlessly, and no lights appeared on the horizon. It was as though I were driving in circles on a straight road. Then I saw it. Standing on the shoulder of the road was the woman from the gas station. She looked exactly as she had the last time I saw her, disheveled blonde hair and unblinking eyes. But now she seemed taller, darker, almost as if her presence had grown, fed by the surrounding darkness. I drove past her, but my entire body shuddered. In the rearview mirror, she was still there, closer now, somehow keeping pace with the truck. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The road stretched on endlessly, and time seemed to stand still. Suddenly, the engine sputtered. The truck coughed and lost power until it rolled to a complete stop in the middle of the road. I looked around, but all I could see was darkness, and the woman now directly in front of the truck. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, despite every instinct screaming at me to stay inside. The figure stood still, but something was off. When the flashlight beam illuminated her, I realized she wasn't alone. Behind her, a second silhouette was forming, much taller, distorted, like a shadow that defied the natural laws of light. The woman started walking toward me, her voice echoing across the empty expanse. "You shouldn't have taken the tape." I ran back to the truck, slamming the door shut and locking it, my breathing ragged. She disappeared right before my eyes, but the sound from the cassette player returned on its own. The same deep, dragging voice repeated, "You can't escape." At that moment, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. A car was coming down the road. I jumped out of the truck, waving frantically at the approaching driver. It was a man in a pickup truck. I quickly explained what was happening, leaving out the more unbelievable details. "I'll take you to the next town. Leave the truck here," he said, his southern drawl calm but firm. I climbed into his truck, but something felt off. As he drove, the murmurs returned, not from the radio, but from the bed of the pickup. I turned to look, and there it was, the cassette tape. "You shouldn't have brought that," the man said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The last thing I saw was the road dissolving into total darkness. And now I'm still trying to figure out how I'm writing this. Because, as it seems, I never left that road.